Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope y'all are having a fantastic day. Now the game we're going to be taking a look at is Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2, more specifically its full title, and I am not making this up, Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 for Nintendo Switch. That is definitely a mouthful. I couldn't even say that 5 times fast if I wanted to. So to say that I was pretty underwhelmed by the original reveal of Xenoverse 2, that would definitely be an understatement. Don't get it twisted. I was a big fan of Xenoverse 1. I thought that while it was a game that kind of lacked in comparison to other Dragon Ball games, I felt that they had enough content in there to justify the future longevity of this series. I thought that Dimps did a fantastic job really crafting a game that with a sequel, they could improve on all the problems the first title had. Unfortunately, when I saw the reveal of the sequel, to me it just felt like another annualized anime franchise. That right there bothered me tremendously because I was so disappointed that they were going down the annualized video game route when I know that they could have taken their time with the sequel and done so much more. So here we are a year out. I decided to skip Xenoverse on the original releases. What made me go out there and buy the Switch version? Well, it was $20, so I couldn't beat that price. But there were a lot of things that I found interesting with this release, and I know that you guys, since you're on the fence about it, wanted to hear my opinions. This is coming from a guy who hasn't put really much time in Xenoverse 2 by comparison to the other folks out there who have been playing it on release. So I'm basing my assumptions and my opinions on the game from my first experiences with the Switch version. So as far as performance goes, this is something I definitely think is a major highlight of the Switch release. And this is something that I think will sway a lot of people towards purchasing this, because outside of one or two caveats, the Switch version of Xenoverse 2 actually holds up surprisingly well in comparison to the other counterparts. And no, I'm not saying that because the game itself runs great. I'm saying that because the game itself is Xenoverse 2. There are no compromises that exist between this version and the others. Let me explain that in further detail because I know some people are questioning the frame rate. With the original release of Xenoverse 1, the game was locked at 30 FPS. Some people attributed that to the fact that it was a cross-generational title with PS3, PS4. But since Xenoverse 2 was a full-on 8th gen exclusive, you would think that, okay, they're going to make some improvements. And they did. That version of the game runs at 60 frames per second. On the Nintendo Switch, it's kind of a different story. The game does run at 60 frames per second, but only in one particular mode. That is the 1v1 competitive battle. If you're playing with your friend, and just your friend, the game runs at a rock-solid, steady 60 frames per second. And to be honest, I didn't really notice much of a difference that existed between Switch version and PlayStation 4 in that respect. Now for everything else in the game, Xenoverse 2 runs at 30 FPS. So all of the team battles that you would do with the parallel quest when you have multiple characters on screen, it's 30 frames per second. But it's a locked 30 frames per second. So if you were familiar with playing Xenoverse 1 on the PlayStation 4, then you're going to fit right at home with the Switch version. I haven't noticed any significant frame rate dips. I haven't noticed any significant slowdowns when I'm actually in combat, which is all I could have asked for with the game. And when I was looking at side-by-side comparisons, I really didn't notice too much of a difference in the graphics front. You can attribute that to the fact that Xenoverse 2 is a pretty stylistic game, so of course major differences aren't going to exist as if it was something like a more realistic title. So in that respect, I think that whether you're buying the game on Switch or on PlayStation 4, you're getting pretty much the same experience. While I can definitely commend the guys who ported this game on making sure Xenoverse 2 on Switch is a buttery smooth experience for fighting, I can't really say the same for Kanton City. Again, this is another caveat that I kind of have to explain a bit. When you're in Kanton City, for the most part, the frame rate is smooth. However, I have gotten into several situations where the frame rate dips into the low 20s. It's not something that's necessarily a deal breaker because you're just running around the hub, but it is something worth mentioning because when it does chug, man, it's not a pretty sight for the 5 to 10 seconds that it happens. However, I have heard this is a problem that exists on all versions of Xenoverse 2, but again, I'm not entirely sure how much of an issue it is on those platforms. If you have the game, definitely comment down below and let me know if the frame rate issues are not exclusive to the Nintendo Switch version. Moving away from the performance of the game, let's talk about some of my first impressions and what I honestly think about Xenoverse 2. As it stands, you guys, if you couldn't tell by the intro of the video, Xenoverse 2 is just not a game for me. That's not to say the game is bad in any way, I'm just not thoroughly impressed with the sequel that they crafted. That's not to say that you can't find enjoyment in Xenoverse 2. I think that if you were a big fan of the first Xenoverse, you're going to fit right at home with the sequel because it just looks like a more fully fleshed out version of that title. But for me, I honestly was expecting something more. The campaign itself really ain't nothing to write home about. I mean, they have done some things to differentiate it from the first one, but as it stands, it still feels like a retread for the most part. Again, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing if this is what you're looking for. Long term, I think the most enjoyment that I'm going to have with Xenoverse 2 is going to come from its online components. More specifically, running parallel quests with your friends, doing 1v1 battles, the tournament modes. That's where I usually get my enjoyment out of most of these anime fighters. But there is one major issue that I need to address, and it's something that, again, I need you guys' clarification on, because I thought that this was just an issue with the Nintendo Switch version. In Xenoverse 2, there's no real way for you to invite your friends to run parallel quests, at least from the point that I'm at in the game. It just seems to me like there isn't a cohesive friend invite system like you would have in other games. Again, I thought that this was because the Nintendo Switch does not have a cross-game invite system. Maybe this exists on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, but I don't remember it being this complicated when I was playing the first Xenoverse on PS4. So some clarification in the comment section would definitely help because as it stands, it just seems very cumbersome to invite your friends. In terms of Switch exclusive features, of course, the obvious one being motion controls, I honestly didn't find myself having too much fun with them. Granted, it did give me a flashback to the Nintendo Wii playing Budokai Tenkaichi 2 and 3, but as it stands, I think the most enjoyment you're going to have out of this game is when you're using the standard control style or the Pro Controller, which I found to be the most comfortable. In terms of longevity for the game, Bandai Namco is not leaving anyone out to die, basically meaning they want to make as much money on this release as possible, so they are indeed putting in all of the DLC content that is releasing on both PlayStation, Xbox One, in addition to Steam. So if you are a person who wants to spend money on this game, you have the opportunity to buy the DLC in addition to the TP medals right here, which are their equivalent of microtransactions. Thankfully, you are able to grind for the TP medals in the game, and they're not a major focal point of currency. We come down to my final recommendation on this game. Would I recommend y'all pick up Xenoverse 2 for Nintendo Switch? It's kind of complicated. As you can see, while I'm not necessarily a big fan of the game, I do find some enjoyment out of it. I definitely think it's a fun game to play here and there, but not something with a lot of depth that I'm going to be coming back to day in and day out. However, I do have to commend Bandai Namco and Dimps for the excellent port job on Nintendo Switch. When the only major deciding factor between the two versions is 60 versus 30 for the entire game, when you still have the 60 FPS for the competitive play and the 30 FPS is still rock solid, you can't go wrong with Xenoverse 2 on Nintendo Switch. You're still going to have the option to purchase the DLC, you're still getting the same great Xenoverse experience, and fingers crossed in the future they actually patch in that friend system because that is just extremely convoluted and cumbersome. Anyways, from me to you for now, my name is NGS signing out, and like always, I will catch you guys later. Peace.